There are bits of discarded military hardware all over the world. There probably shouldn't be, but there are. In some cases, it's just a forgotten tank or plane on the outskirts of a city. But in others, we could be talking about a whole abandoned military base. Their locations might have been top secret once, but they're not now. We know where they're all hiding, and we'll show you in this video. A lot of former Soviet military buildings and outposts were abandoned when the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 1990s. One of them can be found in the Khabarovsk territory, some 70 miles from Komsomolsk. It doesn't look like much from the outside, but once you get through the door, it's a different story. It's thought that this was once an air defense command post, and by the looks of things, it seems that its occupants left a lot of things behind when they left. Broken electronics and wiring still cling to the walls. Chairs still sit behind tables, waiting for their owners to come back to work. In places, you can even still see Soviet propaganda paintings. Information posters show pictures of planners and buildings, with technical information to accompany them. Head into the barracks and the munition stores, and you'll still find shelves full of equipment and personal belongings. Some of this stuff might even still be dangerous. Who knows what kind of information was once relayed through these telephones and what kind of operations were planned using these maps? The whole place is like a Cold War time capsule. Elsewhere in Russia, there's a ghost town that was once a Soviet garrison, right in the middle of the country's fabled land of fire and ice, Kamchatka. The town is hidden away in the snowy mountains of the region, where it was ordered to be built by Nikita Khrushchev in 1960 under the name Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky 54. Submarines were both built and stored here. Unlike many facilities of its kind, this garrison remained in use after the fall of the Soviet Union, and was only abandoned after the administration of Boris Yeltsin ordered it to be closed down in 1996. The roads that led to the base were destroyed during the abandonment process, so today it can only be accessed by boat or helicopter. A single ship was left behind and is now rusting away in the harbor, where it's used as a landmark by modern-day ships for navigation purposes. The tourists who come here every spring have differing opinions about the base. Some of them describe it as hauntingly beautiful. Others don't see the beauty and describe it as eerie. How does it make you feel when you're looking at these pictures? Moving from Russia to the United States of America, there's an enormous plane storage facility in Arizona known as the Davis-Monthan Air Base. Hardly anybody uses that name though. To most people, it's better known as the Boneyard. This is the largest collection of B-52 planes in the world. It's highly unlikely that any of them will ever fly again. The Boneyard was opened just outside Tucson in 1946 as a storage point for transport and bomber planes from World War II. More planes were added in the years that followed. There were around 6,000 planes here after the Vietnam War, although 2,000 have been scrapped since then. Most of the planes don't look anywhere near as old as they are, thanks to the combination of high altitude and low humidity. When the USSR and the USA signed the START Treaty in 1991, B-52 Stratofortresses were brought here to be stripped of their weapons and then cut into pieces. For most of them, that marked the end of a lifetime of service that began in 1952. They're still useful today, as an average of 5,000 parts from these planes are taken and used in repairs for working planes every year. We're bouncing back and forth between the USA and Russia so far in this video, and we're going to carry on doing it. Just off the coast of Murmansk in the Barents Sea lies the wreck of the Russian nuclear submarine K-159. The wreck is still believed to be dangerous, and poses an existential threat to the fisheries on the surface, as well as the whales, polar bears, haddock, and red king crab that call the region home. It's one of many nuclear submarine wrecks in the region, another of which is the K-27. The vessel was known as the Golden Fish because of its eye-watering cost, but was scuttled in 1982 after a series of accidents, including a reactor rupture that exposed 9 sailors to a fatal dose of radiation. Safety measures were implemented when the vessel was scuttled, but it will become dangerous again by 2032 at the latest unless new measures and protections are introduced. The story of the K-159 is different. It sank with no warning in 2003 and went to the bottom of the ocean carrying more than 1,700 pounds of spent uranium fuel. The wreck has been described as a slow-motion Chernobyl on the seabed. We're back to America again, and to be more specific, we're heading to South Dakota to check out the Black Hills Ordinance Depot. It's a facility that was created during a desperate time of need as the USA entered the Second World War. The Ordnance Corps of the U.S. Army needed more storage, and the Black Hills site was the answer. The depot is so enormous that back when it was active, it required a whole town's worth of people to keep it running. That's why a town was built next to it. Amenities were added to the town to keep its people entertained, including a bowling alley, a theater, a swimming pool, and a church. There was less need for the depot after the war ended, and so Black Hills became a top-secret testing location. Both sarin and mustard gas are known to have been developed and tested here. Even that came to an end eventually, and the military formally abandoned the depot and its associated town in 1967. The old buildings have stood empty since then, but our understanding is that the land now belongs to a property developer who intends to turn the old structures into doomsday shelters. We have another World War II base to look at now, but this one's in Greenland. This is Blue East 2, which was built as a U.S. Air Force base in 1941. The Americans moved out a very long time ago, but the thousands of orange barrels of toxic waste they left behind are still there. The locals have taken to calling the barrels American flowers, because from a distance they look like fields of marigolds. If only they were anything quite so pleasant. The U.S. military was only here between 1941 and 1947 after getting permission from Denmark to use the land, but the Danes probably wish they'd never given that permission. The barrels of waste aren't the only things causing problems here. The buildings that the U.S. military erected are falling apart, and they're full of asbestos. The metal trucks are rusting and corroding. Some sources even say that there are thousands of tons of undetonated dynamite on the island of Ekatek. Denmark finally started funding a cleanup operation in 2019, but the funds they've provided aren't likely to be sufficient to finish the job. Is it too much to ask of the Americans to come back and clean up their mess? In March 1945, an American merchant ship called the Thomas Donaldson attempted to enter the Kola Inlet of the Barents Sea. It didn't make it. The ship was hit by a German torpedo and sank, taking its cargo of Sherman tanks with it. In July 2017, 2 of those tanks were finally brought back to the surface after a rescue operation. Considering how long they've been down there, they're in surprisingly good condition. The salvage operation wasn't easy. The wreck is over 160 feet beneath the water, and it took a week just to clear away enough debris from the wreck of the Thomas Donaldson to reach the tanks. Much of the work was done by remote-controlled submarines, as it would be too risky to send people down there to handle the task manually. Unusually for a salvage operation involving American military hardware, the work was overseen by the Russian Navy. What will happen to the tanks now is uncertain. It's theoretically possible to repair them sufficiently to make them operational again, but there's no reason why the Russian military would want to spend time and money on repairing old American tanks. Thousands of people see Fort Tilden in Queens, New York, USA every year without knowing what it is. To them, it looks like a strange concrete ruin being slowly overtaken by nature. In reality, though, this was once a seaside military fortress. Fort Tilden was once part of America's Atlantic seawall defense system. In fact, it was the single most important part of that system. The government had the base built in 1917 as a safeguard against the new threats posed by the First World War. It was a deterrent against German U-boats at the time, although it later went on to become a deterrent against the Russian fleet during the Cold War. Its two giant batteries, known as the Harris batteries, housed enormous cannons capable of firing 16-inch shells as far as 30 miles out to sea. Ajax and Hercules nuclear missiles were stored here during the Cold War. Had they ever been used, they would have caused twice as much devastation as the bomb that landed on Hiroshima. By the early 1970s, the fort's facilities had largely become obsolete, and so it was abandoned in 1972. Had Russia ever launched anything at the USA during the Cold War, military staff at North Concord radio station in Essex, Vermont, would have been the first to know about it. It was built during the mid-1950s at a remote location on the ridge of East Mountain, surrounded by forests and at a perfect height for an early warning station. Work on the facility began in 1954 and was finished by 1956. The 911th Aircraft Control and Warning Squadron was deployed to the base as soon as it opened. Life here would have been hard in winter, which is presumably why a bowling alley and a gym were later added to the basic sleeping quarters and dining rooms. In later years, there was a bus service that took troops to the nearest town, so they could socialize with the locals. There were 170 men living here in total during the base's peak years. The site was renamed Lyndonville Air Force Base in 1962 ahead of a planned series of improvements, including a new radar system, but the U.S. Air Force ordered it to be closed in 1963 before the improvement work was carried out. Life at North Concord radio station was hard, but life at Adak station was even harder. What's left of the old station can be found on Adak Island, which is one of Alaska's Aleutian Islands. It's been home to the Alouette people for centuries, and they don't seem to mind it. But the 6,000 or so U.S. military personnel who were stationed here during the Second World War were less keen on it. The location was strategically important. By building a base and an airfield here in 1942, the Americans gave themselves a platform to launch operations against the Japanese. Those who worked eventually returned home telling horror stories about the quality of the food, the freezing cold weather, and the constant rumblings and thick smoke that emitted from the island's active volcano. The base remained occupied long after the war ended, with a U.S. military presence maintained on the island until 1997. When they eventually packed up and went home, the population of Adak Island dropped from 7,000 to a mere 300. Entire streets of houses have collapsed in on themselves in the 25 years since then because there's nobody to look after them. As far as anybody knows, there are only 4 remaining Be6 planes in the world. One of them is in Kiev. 2 of them are in China. The 4th is standing on a plinth in Gryaznaya Bay on the Arctic Kola Peninsula. It was erected as a monument in 1968, but no budget has ever been provided for taking care of the monument. That's why it's in such a sorry state today. There's nothing to stop vandals from attacking the monument, and there are signs that a few have tried. But it's such a difficult location to reach that its remoteness probably offers it a little protection. The only way to get to it is by boat. Other than the occasional photographer, the only visitors the monument gets are seagulls. While it's managed to remain standing for more than half a century, nobody knows how much longer the monument is likely to last. The climate in the area is changing, and the water levels get closer to reaching the bottom of the plain every year. If current trends continue, the sea might simply lift it up and carry it away within the next decade. We've spent a lot of time looking at former American or Russian facilities, so let's check out something different. This is Zeljava Air Base in Zeljava, Croatia. It was once the biggest underground airbase in Yugoslavia, but today it lies in ruins. The base is a relic of Yugoslavia's communist era and was officially known as Objekt 505. Aside from being full of planes, the base also housed a long-range early warning defense system. It took 8 years to build the base, with work starting in 1957 and ending in 1965. Financial mismanagement meant that costs quickly spiraled out of control. It eventually cost $6 billion to get the base open. That was 3 times more than the country's annual military budget. In its pomp, Zeljava Air Base would have looked like something from a James Bond movie. It had 4 exits for launching jets, 2 entire Hunter Squadron houses in the darkness, and enough space for 1,000 people to live inside it for 30 days in the event of a nuclear attack. When the Yugoslav National Army was eventually forced to retreat from this part of Croatia during the Civil War, they tried to blow it up to ensure it would never fall into enemy hands. As you can see from the fact that most of the base is still standing, they were only partially successful. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you soon!